Wind cut sharp over the open plains of Kansas, carrying dust, the distant clang of metal, and the murmurs of men who had seen too much war, and yet were still not finished with it. At the far edge of Fort Briar Hollow, a frontier military outpost dug into the dirt like a stubborn scar. Soldiers milled about, the gun-range grizzled veterans and green recruits alike, their boots scuffing the cracked earth, their laughter echoing into the cold air. No one noticed her at first, not until she crossed the parade field. She wasn't supposed to be there barefoot, mud-stained, no more than 11 years old, with a burlap satchel slung over her shoulder and a wooden crossbow clutched tight in her hand. Her dress, once white, now clung to her frame in brown tatters. She had walked 20 miles through winter-burnt grasslands. No horse, no voice raised in greeting. Only the fire in her eyes spoke, and it spoke louder than any word. Private Jensen saw her first. "We got a stray, sir," he muttered to the officer. Beside him, General Harlan Clay turned from his cigar with a scowl. "A what?" The girl kept walking. Harlan Clay was a man carved from war-broad, bearded and built like a doorframe. His coat bore the fray of a dozen campaigns, and his eyes were sharp, sun-beaten chips of iron. He stepped forward, blocking her path. "You lost, little miss?" he asked, voice rough from bourbon and bad winters. She stopped 3 feet from him, looked up, said nothing. Clay narrowed his eyes. "You deaf, mute, or just rude?" She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small roll of leather, folded it to reveal bolts. Not arrows, bolts, handmade, clean, razor-tipped, and oiled with something that smelled faintly of tallow and pine. Then she raised the crossbow. Soldiers shifted, muttering. A few laughed outright. "She's serious?" Someone snorted. "Looks like she's got her daddy's toy." But there was no amusement in her, only stillness. That kind of stillness animals have, right before they strike. Clay leaned down, squinting. "You planning to shoot someone, girl?" She shook her head, slowly, then pointed to the gun range. Behind him, where paper targets swayed in the wind. "You want to shoot?" Clay scoffed. With that, a beat. Then she nodded. A ripple of disbelief rolled through the onlookers. Clay scratched his beard, half interested, half offended. "You think you can beat my men? You think this?" "Whatever that is," he said, motioning to the crossbow like it was a bundle of sticks, "belongs on my range." Another nod. He exhaled hard. "Well, I'll be damned." A younger officer, Lieutenant Avery, stepped in, eyes narrowing. "Sir, maybe we should move her along. She's just a child. She's here. Might as well give the lass a shot," Clay said, voice laced with amusement. "A little entertainment before supper, eh?" Clem walked past him without waiting for permission, her boots silent on the gravel. The soldiers formed a half circle, arms crossed, amused grins spreading like fire through dry brush. One man whistled low. "She even know how to load that thing?" She did, quick and precise, the kind of speed that came not from games, but from survival. Clem locked the string with a quiet snap, settled her bolt, raised the crossbow, and stared downrange. Wind kicked up dust. Flags rustled. Someone coughed. No one was laughing anymore. She didn't blink, didn't sway, and in that silence, something shifted, not in the air, but in them. They saw now. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't trying. She was ready. Her hands were steady. She breathed once, long and slow, and then the story that brought her here began to speak, though she herself remained silent. It had started 2 winters back, when Clem's world had ended, not with a gunshot, but with fire. Her family homesteaded along the Cimarron Trail, a lonely stretch of land between nowhere and a place maps hadn't caught up to yet. Her father had been a farmer with a Union badge still tucked into a locked chest, her mother, a healer with a soft voice, and her brother, a boy who could whittle anything out of cedar and used to say, Clem was born with lightning in her blood, but lightning couldn't stop men with guns and greed. They came one night under the cover of a red sky. 5 ex-soldiers, turned raiders, drunk on lawlessness, convinced that land wasn't worth a damn if it wasn't theirs. They torched the barn first. Clem had been asleep on the loft floor, the heat waking her, the screams chasing her down the stairs. She ran, barefoot into the woods, while her father stayed to fight, while her mother shielded her brother with her own body. By dawn, nothing remained but ash and bone. She never found their graves, just a crossbow, wrapped in old canvas beneath the floorboard in the ruined shed. Her father's last weapon, abandoned when muskets became cheaper. Silent, simple, deadly dot. For the next year, Clem lived alone. Neighbors close enough to care. No voice to cry out with anymore. She became wind and shadow, tracking rabbits, stringing snares, reading tracks and scents. The crossbow fed her, protected her, and soon it became something else, a language only she could speak now. Here at Fort Briar Hollow, she was ready to be heard. Clem loosed her first shot. The bolt hit with a dry thump dead center of the target. A murmur ran through the watching soldiers. She reloaded, fired again, bullseye, then again and again. 10 shots, 10 perfect centers. The murmurs faded to silence. Eyes narrowed. Kay straightened. Even the skeptics leaned forward. Now she reloaded faster. The 11th and 12th came within seconds. 13th and 14th split their predecessors by the time she released her 20th bolt. Her final one, the paper target, had been torn to ribbons. Clay's cigar hung limp from his mouth. Forgotten, someone whispered. That ain't natural. No. One responded. All they could do was watch as the girl, without a word, lowered the crossbow and stepped away from the line. She didn't smile, didn't bow. She just retrieved her satchel, slung it over her shoulder, and returned to her spot by the old supply wagon where she'd sat earlier, waiting. It was the general who finally spoke. His voice came low, uncertain. Where'd you learn that? Clem met his eyes, but said nothing. One gust blew strands of hair across her face, and she made no effort to brush them away. You some kind of scout's daughter? Sharpshooter's kin? Still no answer. He cleared his throat. Got a name? She waited a breath, then two. Finally, with a voice rough from disuse, she rasped, Clementine. Clay nodded, more to himself than her. A Clementine. Seems you've made yourself known. The soldiers began to disperse, silent now, not from shame or anger, but something deeper, respect, or perhaps our night approached. The clouds hung low and heavy, but the fire lit in their camp now came not just from logs and coals, but from the story that would be whispered for weeks to come. The girl with the crossbow. Clem, as the shadows deepened and the first stars appeared. Overhead, no one dared mock her again. Sea had carved her name into their memories with nothing but wood, steel, and silence, but far beyond the range. In the distant trees, someone else had seen what she'd done. A figure, half shrouded in dusk, leaned against a cedar trunk, watching, listening, waiting. The wind shifted, and the figure melted into the woods. Clem sat alone, eyes fixed on the fire, her fingers brushing the carved bolts at her side, not knowing yet that her story was only just beginning. The target stood in tatters, riddled with precision. 20 bolts, 20 hits. The soldiers around the range no longer smirked. Some looked uneasy, as if what they'd witnessed had rearranged something inside them, something too stubborn for logic to fix. General Harlan Clay rubbed the back of his neck, watching the little girl retreat to the shadow of the supply wagon once more. Her crossbow slung across her back like a soldier's rifle. No one dared approach her that night. The fire crackled at the center of camp, but laughter had quieted, replaced by sidelong glances and murmured talk. They spoke of her with lowered voices, as if loudness might insult whatever strange power she held. Few called her a prodigy. Others whispered she was cursed. Clay said nothing, staring into the flames with a bottle beside his boot and a growing unease that he couldn't name. Clementine sat alone, whittling another bolt under a lantern's glow. Each movement was deliberate, like she wasn't just crafting a weapon, but shaping something sacred. Her fingers worked with the muscle memory of one who had long ago stopped questioning the need for perfection. She shaved the shaft smooth, tested the balance, inspected the point. She wasn't trying to prove anything, not to them. Tease wasn't performance. It was survival. A footstep shifted behind her, barely a sound, but her head turned instantly. He stood just at the edge of the firelight, arms folded, hat low over his brow, coat dusty and worn like it hadn't seen a stitch in years. He was taller than Clay, lean, sharp-featured, and silent. His presence didn't demand attention. He'd waited for it. "I seen wind move with less quiet than you," he said, voice low and dry. Clem studied him. "Name's Jonah," he added, tipping the brim of his hat. "I used to be good with a rifle. Now I'm just good at keeping to myself." She said nothing. "You're fast," he continued, eyes settling on her crossbow. "Not just fast, you're patient." That's the part that scares him. She turned back to the bolt in her hands. Jonah squatted beside her, his joints cracking faintly. He pulled something from his pocket, a coin, then set it in the dirt between them. "You know what a buffalo nickel is?" She glanced at it, nodded once. "Hard to find. Like a clean man in Washington. But harder still's a girl who can shoot like that without shaking." He looked at her long. "Where'd you learn?" A moment passed. Then another. "Nowhere," she said at last. "Just had to." Jonah nodded slowly. He didn't press. They sat in silence for a time, the fire behind them flickering against the canvas walls of the tents. Tent laughter echoed from the officers. "Mess, but out here at the edge of camp, there was only wind and wood and ghosts." "I was younger than you," Jonah said eventually, "when I made my first kill. Rifle too long for my arm. Recoil knocked out 2 teeth. Shot a man who'd slit my brother open for a pair of boots." Clem didn't flinch, was proud. "Then I cried for a week after." He looked at her again. "You don't look like you." "Cried? I did," she replied softly, "but there wasn't time for a week." Jonah gave a humorless smile. "Then we got something in common." A sudden shout rose from the northern watch. Soldiers scrambled up from their fires, hands reaching for weapons. Clay emerged from his tent, coat half-buttoned, revolver drawn. Clem stood instantly, bolt clenched in her fist. A silhouette galloped into camp, a scout, pale with fear, clothes torn. "We found signs near the south ridge, tracks, big ones. 5, maybe 6 riders. Heavy, could be them raiders, been picking off homesteads past the timberline." Clay swore. "Form a perimeter. Nobody sleeps tonight." Soldiers obeyed at once. Tension strung, the air taut. Clem didn't move, didn't blink. Her jaw clenched. Jonah noticed. "You know who it is, don't you?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said everything. Clay barked orders until dawn. Torches were lit, barricades readied, but most believed it'd be a false alarm. Just wild animals, ghosts. Frontier life taught men to fear phantoms that never came. Except this one did. It came with thunder. At first, was only dust on the horizon. 6 riders, tearing across the ridge under the gray morning sky. Cloaked in wolfskin and hatred. Their faces half covered. Their saddles loaded with pistols, torches, and trophies. These weren't men hunting supplies. They were hunting memories. Clem was the one who saw their banner, 2 black lines slashed through a red sun, stitched on an old Confederate flag. Her breath caught. One of them still wore her father's belt buckle. She remembered it like a wound. Clay stood near the command post, rifle slung, eyes narrowing. "Men, we've got company. Defensive positions. Tight lines. No lone heroics." Jonah appeared beside him without a word, cradling a battered long rifle with a wooden stock smoothed by years. Clay raised an eyebrow. "Thought you left." "Thought I might stay. Girls earned at least that." The raiders circled the camp, testing its edges. The soldiers waited behind crates, sandbags, and barrels. Clem positioned herself beside a wagon wheel, eyes fixed, calm as snowfall. Gunfire exploded. The fight came fast and violent. 2 riders charged the gate. Jonah dropped one with a single shot. Clay roared orders. Smoke clouded the air. The smell of black powder mixed with sweat and blood. Clem moved like she'd done it 100 times. Bolt, draw, fire, reload. Her bolts found flesh, found bone, found the space between helmets and hearts. Soldier cried out behind her, wounded. She pulled him to cover without hesitation and loosed another bolt into a raider trying to flank them. Jonah watched from the high crate, keeping count. "She's not shooting. She's purging." The final rider broke through the southern post. He galloped straight toward the supply tent, screaming something in a language Clem didn't recognize. Rifle raised. It was him, the man with her father's buckle, with her mother's necklace wrapped around his saddle horn. His eyes met hers. He raised his rifle. She didn't move, not until the last second. Then her hand blurred, bolt loosed. The man jerked back, fell. The rifle flew from his grip. She walked toward his body slowly, crossbow lowered round her. The sounds of gunfire faded. The soldiers cheered. The raiders had fallen or fled, but Clem knelt beside him. He was still alive, wheezing, gurgling. The bolt lodged in his chest. His eyes were glassy, full of confusion, not fear, just disbelief that someone so small had ended his war. Her fingers hovered near his face, but didn't touch. Jonah came behind her, his voice quiet. He's done. Let him go. Clem stood. Her shoulders were shaking, but not with fear. With something older, something colder. She turned her back before the man could take his last breath. The sun broke through the clouds at last, tainting the bloodied field gold. Clay approached her slowly, rifle hanging by his side. I misjudged you, he said gruffly. That won't happen again. She didn't answer, but in her eyes, something had changed. The silence remained, but it no longer hit her. It defined her. Jonah clapped her lightly on the shoulder. You did what most grown men never could. You looked evil in the eye and walked away. She nodded, but her gaze was distant, and as the soldiers tended wounds and burned the remains of the broken banner, she sat back down by the wagon, crossbow across her knees, staring into the horizon like she was waiting for something worse that hadn't yet come. And in the hills beyond the ridge, where the smoke rose into morning sky, another figure watched with narrowed eyes, fingers wrapped tight around a blood-stained map. Morning light crept over the charred remnants of the battlefield, washing everything in pale gold. The bodies had been cleared, the fire pits stoked again, and the blood scrubbed from the earth, at least what could be. The air still carried that iron scent of gunpowder and mortality, but the mood had shifted. Fort Briar Hollow stood not just intact, but steadied by something it hadn't known it needed. A child with a crossbow and a vengeance older than her years. Clementine sat under the broken axle of the supply wagon, stringing a fresh bowline with practiced fingers. Her hands trembled slightly, though no one watching could see it. She hadn't spoken since the battle ended. Not to Clay, not to Jonah, not to the medic who tried to patch a shallow gash on her calf. She had allowed the treatment, but refused the comfort. The weight in her chest hadn't lessened with victory. If anything, it had grown heavier. Jonah leaned against a post a few feet away, chewing a twig of sagebrush. His coat was stained with blood, none of it his. He hadn't cleaned the rifle yet, just held it loosely, like it was a part of him, not a weapon. She's not sleeping, he said aloud, though no one asked. Girl like that, she's seen too many ghosts to dream quiet. General. Clay stood on the ridge, overlooking the southern fence, his binoculars clenched in one hand, cigar long gone cold in the other. The creases in his forehead had deepened, and though his uniform was buttoned and straight, something in his posture betrayed a man undone. He turned toward Jonah with a scowl, meant to cover respect. She shouldn't have been on that field, Clay muttered, but I'm damn glad she was. Jonah didn't look at him. She didn't come to ask permission. That's what bothers me, Clay admitted. What kind of world builds a kid like that? Jonah sighed. Same kind that makes generals out of butchers. Clay didn't argue. That night, the sky split with thunder. A storm rolled in from the west, fierce and sudden. The rain came down hard and fast, flattening tents, drowning fires, soaking rifles and boots alike. The soldiers scrambled, yelling and laughing as they fought wind and canvas. Clem didn't move from her post. She sat beneath the wagon, eyes closed, letting the rain soak her skin, washed the ash from her face. The storm felt cleaner than the day, more honest. It didn't pretend to spare anyone. Jonah approached with a dry tarp. He didn't offer it. She opened her eyes. She opened her eyes and took it without a word. They sat side by side as the wind howled through the camp for a long while. The only sound between them was the crackle of lightning and the whisper of rain on wood. "I lost someone," Jonah finally said, his voice low. "My brother. Same way you lost yours, I think. Fire, violence, no time for goodbye." Clem looked at him, not blinking. "I tried to forget it. It's what they tell you. Forget and move on. Be useful. Join the army. Clean your gun. Keep your eyes forward." She waited, but I never forgot. It's not 1 second. It just sank deeper, got heavy, became part of my bones. He turned his head toward her. "You carry that weight different. You make it move." Tilted her head, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. Jonah smiled faintly. "Just don't let it be the only thing you carry. Vengeance burns fast. It'll leave you cold after." She didn't answer, but when she looked away, her eyes glistened. Not from the rain at dawn. General Clay summoned her. She walked into his tent, soaked and silent. He stood behind a small desk, maps spread, orders half-written, strong drink untouched beside his hand. "I need a tracker," he said, without greeting someone who can read the land. "We'll have more trouble before winter. These raiders don't work alone." She nodded once. "You'll report to Sergeant Daniels. You'll be paid, fed, and armed if needed. And," he paused, choosing his words, "you'll have my respect. That may not mean much to you, but it means something around here." She stared at him, then pointed at the map. "Here," she said, voice hoarse. "That's where they're going." He blinked. "How do you know?" She tapped the edge. "It's where I would." Clay exhaled hard. "Then, let's prepare." She left the tent without waiting to be dismissed. That afternoon, she walked the perimeter alone. Soldiers tipped their caps as she passed, not mockingly, not amused, just recognition. A quiet salute. By sunset, the camp had stabilized again. Weapons cleaned. Walls reinforced. A sense of purpose returned. Jonah found her outside the far fence, staring at the hills. "I'm leaving in the morning," he said. "Trail west, Oregon Territory. Heard there's quiet up there." She looked at him, jaw tight. "You don't owe anyone here anything," he added. "Not even me." Her fingers gripped the leather strap of her crossbow. She looked down at the bolts in her satchel. 25 now, all sharpened, all waiting. "You saved more than this camp," he said. "You reminded these men what fear looks like when it fights back." She nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't brighten. He handed her something small, a compass, old, dented, but functional. "Might help you find something else one day," he said. She turned it in her palm. Needle wavered, then settled. He gave her a long look. "You're not done yet, Clementine, but someday you will be. And when that day comes, I hope you'll know what peace feels like." She wanted to say thank you, wanted to ask him to stay, but no words came, only a tight nod. By the next morning, Jonah was gone. Clem stood at the edge of the road, staring west, the compass warm in her hand. She breathed in the cold air, let it fill her chest. Clay watched from the gate. "You sure she'll come back?" his lieutenant asked. The general didn't look away. "No, but I hope, whatever she finds out, there, it's not more war." And as Clementine Rourke disappeared into the morning fog, Crossbow slung across her back, boots kicking up dust with every quiet step. The legend of the little girl at the gun range became more than a story. It became a promise. That strength does not shout, it whispers, it endures, and it never misses. If you believe courage isn't measured by age or size, but by resolve, share Clementine's story, like, comment, and subscribe. 'Cause the frontier was full of legends, but none as silent or as sharp as her. The plains had changed since Clementine left Fort Briar Hollow. The dry hush of summer now gave way to brittle leaves curling under frost. Winds ran colder, harsher, howling across the open lands like ghosts looking for shelter. And still, she walked, always westward, telling no trail but the one inside her. The compass Jonah left her swung gently with every step, though she rarely looked at it. She wasn't searching for direction. She was watching for scents disturbed earth, broken branches, whispers in the trees that didn't belong. She'd become something between a hunter and a myth, Townsfolk in scattered settlements swore they'd seen her. A girl in a leather coat, crossbow slung low, hair tied back in a short braid, eyes sharper than any rifle scope. She never stayed long, bought supplies in silence, paid with pelts or silver, then vanished. Children whispered her name like a campfire secret. Some said she hunted the raiders still. Others claimed she tracked something worse. She'd stopped speaking again, not out of trauma, not out of fear, but because the world around her had lost its need for words. Out here, meaning lived in footprints, in ashes left behind, in the echo of distant gunshots through the trees. The language of violence. The grammar of survival. One morning, as snow began dusting the hills, she found the wagon. It had been burned weeks ago, charred ribs of wood protruding from blackened wheels. Two bodies lay nearby, half covered in frost. A man and a boy, throats cut, mouths open in mid-scream. Clem knelt silently, eyes scanning the site. No boot prints remained in the snow, but there were signs of horseshoe mark near the rocks. Strands of cloth on a branch, an empty brass casing half buried in mud. She touched the cloth, then pressed 2 fingers to the earth. A tremor moved through her, not from fear, but recognition. This wasn't random. The men who did this followed a pattern. Each village hit was smaller, more isolated. No survivors, no reason. It wasn't raining, it's hunting. She stood, face hardening, by sundown. She found another mark, carved into the bark of a pine tree, just above her eye level. 2 black lines slashed through a red sun. The same symbol she'd seen at Briar Hollow, stitched into the flag of the raiders. It had returned, uglier and bolder than before. Someone had reignited the fire, stoked the embers back into flame. And this time, they weren't content with the shadows. They were leaving signs, warnings, or invitations. She followed the trail. For 2 days, crossing a frozen river and winding through gullies where deer moved in nervous herds. The silence of the forest grew heavier the farther she walked, broken only by the soft crunch of her boots and the creak of the bowstring across her shoulder. Then, near the edge of a narrow pass, she heard them, voices, low, gruff, arguing in broken English. She dropped to her stomach and crawled to the ridge, parting dry brush just enough to see dot below her, in a hollow ringed with stone and pine. 5 men huddled around a fire. Their horses were tied nearby. One man cleaned a knife, another tossed bones into the flames. All wore patchwork gear, Confederate remnants, Union scraps, and stolen settler coats. One had a necklace made of children's buttons. The leader stood apart. He wore a bearskin cloak, and his left eye had been replaced with a polished stone. Around his neck hung the same red sun insignia, now etched into a brass disc. He wasn't talking. Key was listening, watching his men with the stillness of a predator measuring the weakest in the pack. Clem's breath steamed in the cold as she observed. Steady. She counted her bolts. 19. Enough. She slipped back down the ridge and began circling the camp, setting traps in silence. A bent branch here, a buried spike there. Not to kill. Too slow. To confuse. Her hands moved like clockwork, each knot tied with purpose. This wasn't revenge. This was eradication. As dusk fell, the men grew drunk. Laughter rose. Bottles clinked. One of them wandered from the fire to relieve himself. He didn't return. Another went looking. Found only blood and a snapped twig by the time the leader barked orders. 3 more were missing. The 4th screamed. The 5th fired blindly into the trees, yelling curses until Clem's bolt struck him just above the collarbone. He dropped, with a wet gurgle, hands clawing at his throat. The leader spun toward the sound, drawing a sawed-off shotgun. Coward, he bellowed into the forest. Face me, whoever you are. Silence answered him. Then, a figure stepped from the shadow's bow. Drawn, boots, silent, eyes glowing with the reflection of FIRELIGHT. Clementine. He blinked, confused. You? Her answer was a bolt to his leg. He dropped with a roar, shotgun firing harmlessly into the air. Clem closed the distance fast, boot crunching bone as she kicked the weapon from his hand. He swung a blade, but she dodged, twisted his wrist, drove. him to the ground. She straddled his chest, the crossbow lowered now, replaced by a hunting knife drawn from her belt. His voice trembled. "What are you?" She looked at him for a long time, not with hate, not with satisfaction, with exhaustion. Then she spoke just 3 words. "Where is he?" The leader hesitated. But the truth was in his eyes before he opened his mouth. "He's coming," he spat. "Bigger than me. Smarter. You won't stop him. No one will." She pressed the blade deeper. "He's building an army. South Ridge. Tunnels. Taught us how to burn towns without smoke. He's already marked the next one." She stood. He stared. Up. Defiant, despite the pain. "What? You gonna let me live?" "No," she said. Then silence. By dawn, she was gone. Only smoke remained in the hollow dot. Days later, General Clay received a letter. No stamp, no signature. Just a folded piece of paper wrapped around a brass disc wand, carved with a red sun. The note read, "Dave moved to the South Ridge. I'll finish what I started." He looked up from the message, mind already racing. "Get me Lieutenant Avery. We're moving." Somewhere beyond the river, Clementine sat beneath a twisted oak, a crossbow resting beside her, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind carried distant echoes, metal boots on stone, a voice she hadn't heard in years, laughing. In the dark, her past wasn't finished, but neither was she, and the storm she'd become was just beginning.